Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar about nutrition and the microbiome. And as you probably know, my name is Tim Spector, and I'm joined today by Sarah Berry. Sarah, introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Berry. I'm a nutritional scientist at King's, working also on all the exciting nutrition data coming out of TwinsUK.
So what we wanted to do today is just guide you through some of the exciting things that Twins have been involved with over the last 10 years on nutrition and the microbiome, and then tell you a bit about the stuff we're doing now and a little bit about what we're going to be doing in the future, because everyone needs to know about nutrition and food. It's probably the most important choices that we make every day, and therefore it's really good to know the sort of discoveries that you've helped enable. So some of you might remember we did do a lot of Twin Studies questionnaires, so-called food frequency questionnaires and food recall questionnaires. And we also did one called a food preference questionnaire. And this was really looking at the genetics of food preferences. I don't know if you remember any of those results, Sarah, do you? When was that maybe even before your time? I think it was about 10 years ago, but it did show that for some foods, there was quite a strong genetic preference, but most of it was environmental. So things like spicy foods, things like garlic, things like eating how much lettuce you like to eat, had quite a strong genetic component, but many of them did not. And I think that really set us off to thinking, perhaps this is a good thing for us to be studying. And so we built up this idea of this variability between people, why one twin would prefer one food, another would prefer different ones. Then we got into the microbiome, and of course, we had those classic papers that you guys helped with, showing that the gut microbes in twins were really odd because they weren't genetic or heritable like we'd shown in virtually everything else. So there was virtually no difference between identical twins and non-identical twins. And that is one of our most cited papers of all time, because it really changed the way a lot of scientists thought about gut microbes and started to realize that those gut microbes could be interacting with our food in a completely different way and changing our lifestyle and on our health. And in a way, we've been collecting more and more microbial data from you. We did those poo surveys very early on, and interestingly, only about 1 in 5 of you returned those early ones. 4 out of 5 saying, "Oh, that's too disgusting, I'm not doing that." But actually, as time has gone on, you've all got really used to it. So virtually everybody is now used to collecting and sending poo in the post to us. And I think that's an interesting sign of the times as this becomes the new normal. So the microbiome stuff is proving incredibly useful, and we're making discoveries all the time on that, linking it to risk of overweight, risk of diabetes, risk of all kinds of diseases, back pain, inflammation, etc. But I think the key link is about how the microbiome links to how our body responds to food. And that's why we wanted to move from these cross-sectional studies to intervention ones. And that's where Sarah comes in, because about 5 years ago, I started chatting to Sarah, who's actually works in a different department at King's, about working with twins. And we had this idea about doing something called the PREDICT studies. So do you want to just remind people what those PREDICT studies are, Sarah?
Yeah, so it's a whole series of studies that's really allowed us to push the fast forward button on nutrition research. The PREDICT 1 study, which is the study that all of you twins were invited to take part in and has made possible for us, was the world's largest study to unravel what determines how we respond to food. And so this is at a time, like Tim's just said, that we were starting to understand that it's not all in our genes in terms of our health responses to food. And we wanted to study what was it that was causing all of this variability that we're seeing, how one person responds to even the same food compared to another person. And so this study was also really quite novel in that we combined very traditional clinical research where the twins came into the twins department and had a really in-depth clinic metabolic day, and we combined that with a remote 2-week at-home phase study using lots of these kind of novel technologies and wearable devices and continuous glucose monitors. So it enabled us to collect the kind of data that we've never been able to do in nutritional research before. So we're able to collect data at a huge scale from all of the twins, as well as a whole breadth of different measures at really high precision. So, you know, really exciting and really, I think, quite a paradigm shift in how we conduct research and the kind of findings from this that, you know, have really advanced our understanding of what shapes how we respond to food.
And so as well as showing that we could do these studies from people's homes, which dramatically reduces the cost of studies, that whole study, that PREDICT study, came up with some really quite amazing findings, didn't they, that surprised us when we first got the results. Just want to run over what you think the most surprising ones were for you.
So I always like to think of them in terms of the who, what, and how. And so what we found was that it's not just what you eat that determines how you respond to food. So, for example, if we're looking at someone's blood sugar response, it's not just about how much sugar there is in the food that they're eating, but we know that who you are is really important. So part of this is your genetics, but part of this is also your microbiome, but also your age, your sex, whether you're pre or postmenopausal. But really interestingly as well, and I think this is where we've really pushed the boundaries, is we saw that how you eat is really important. And by this, I mean the kind of context in which you're living your life. So I mean, how much physical activity you might have done before the meal or after the meal, how much sleep you might have had the day before you've eaten, how stressed you might feel, the order of your meals, the timing of your meals, so the time of day that you're eating as well. And it's only because we were able to do this at home phase with the twins that we were able to look at the how. And so this is what I always play back to people. It's what you eat, who you are, but also how you eat that's really key. And I think this is what was really special about the PREDICT study and the twins, that for the first time ever, we could look at all of these different kind of what we call exposures, all of these different factors, and see how important are they for each individual.
And if I remember rightly, I mean, the reason we really wanted to use twins in this first experiment was for the who you are part of it, because for the last 30 years, I've been finding genes important in virtually everything. And that's why, you know, we stacked that PREDICT study with predominantly twin subjects.
Yep.
But you know, and I thought we'd be using genetic tests in the future to help us look at nutrition, but that's not what we found, is it?
No, I think what's really exciting, and I think what should be really empowering for people as well, is that we found that your genetics actually only played a really small role in how you respond to food, so in how the food shapes your health. And I think that's key because, you know, people often say, you know, oh, well, it's all in my genes, and so you know, I'm overweight because that's in my genes and I respond really badly if I eat high carb foods. But actually we found that a lot of it wasn't due to your genes. And so that should empower people to know it's modifiable. There is something they can do about any diet related disease.
And for the twins, I mean, obviously our previous work had shown there are some food preferences that are genetic rather than cultural. But in this study, we showed that twins eating the same food often had different responses. So how do we sort of put that together? You know, what's that really telling us?
Gosh, that's a tough one, Tim.
I guess the answer is we don't know yet. That's why we still need to do more twin studies. I don't know the answer either, but I think it suggests there's different mechanisms for me. Our brain may say, oh, you know, I like garlic, for example, but actually because we have, my view is because twins have very different microbes, the genes might say this is the food I like, but actually their gut microbes may actually prefer different foods. And so that's why they break down those foods differently and you get a different response. So that's why I often get, you know, one twin can be a meat eater, the other one a vegetarian. There's different preferences, but it means they might actually break down foods differently. So I think it's trying to separate what is genetic, and some of that is perhaps, you know, food choices with the result of that food. And I think that's perhaps where we're heading. But I think it does explain a lot of the strange things we found in the twins. For some things are very similar, they look alike, they, you know, identical twins particularly will have the similar expressions in the way they eat food, you know, with, you know, how we pick up a teacup with the same fingers. But we did show quite a few separate ones where one had a bad response to fats and the other one a good response to fats, which we couldn't explain other than through the gut microbes. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we think about your blood sugar response to a meal, so if we take the results from all of the twins that did the Predict1 study, where we found that more than 50% of the differences between twins in their blood sugar response to exactly the same meal was not due to genetics. We found a large proportion of that was due to their microbiome. A large proportion was due to the how we eat that I mentioned before, you know, physical activity, you know, sleep, etc. And then other factors like the menopause, like age, like sex. But actually, that's really interesting what you said, Tim, about food preferences, because something that I think is really exciting and hasn't been done before, and given that you have this data from the twins, could be really quite revolutionary in terms of how we think about delivering advice to individuals, is that why we make those choices. So now that we have this fantastic knowledge from the twins predict data on the who they are, what they're eating and how they're eating, if we can combine that with the why they're making those choices, that can actually allow us to deliver a kind of personalized advice, not just about what type of food to eat, but about around their lifestyle, but also around why they're making those choices. And we must think of the why alongside the who, what, and how.
Yeah, no, I think it's very important. Now, I've got some questions here from twins, which hopefully between us we can get through. So many twins like myself are going through the menopause. How much can I blame the menopause on my weight gain compared to other factors?
So we looked exactly at this in the Predict1 study, and we've looked at a number of factors. We've looked at how menopause is associated with dietary changes, lifestyle changes, and how it impacts downstream health outcomes, including our weight. And we do see that if we look at pre and postmenopausal women, there's a huge impact on weight, a huge impact on different health outcomes. What we don't know is how much is due to declining estrogen. However, we can look in our Predict1 data at those taking HRT, which is artificially giving women estrogen, and we see that those that are taking HRT don't tend to have this menopause-related weight gain. But what's really interesting, this is one of the key findings actually from our menopause research in the twins in Predict1, is that when we looked at people and matched their age, whether they were pre or postmenopausal, so we tried to disentangle how much of an effect age has versus the menopause, we saw that for people who were postmenopausal, they had a lot higher blood sugar responses after eating meals. They had higher inflammation as well after eating meals, even compared to age-matched premenopause, showing that it was due most likely to the menopause, and showing as well that it's a really important time for us to give targeted dietary advice, that we can say to these individuals that you are postmenopausal, you are going to have worse blood sugar responses, you are going to have worse inflammatory responses, to meals. So these are the kind of strategies we can advise to minimize that.
Most medical advice would have been up to recently to say, well, if you're putting on weight, just eat less and walk, do more exercise. Do you think that's still good advice?
No, I think unfortunately for postmenopausal women, perimenopausal women, it's an uphill struggle, which is, it's tough. And I think though that there is a lot we can do about it. And I think that it's not just simply a case of eat less, exercise more. We know the whole calories in, calories out, is not a sustainable way to maintain your weight, prevent weight gain, or indeed achieve weight loss. We know that by looking at how you respond to food immediately after eating meals, so like these blood sugar responses you have immediately after you've had, for example, food containing carbohydrates, we know that if you can modify those kind of responses, you can really help minimize some of that weight gain. And
do people need to do a test like the Zoe test to do that, or can they sort of find out themselves, do you think?
So, ideally you would wear a continuous glucose monitor, so you could look at how your blood sugar's changing over day to day. I know these aren't accessible for everyone, so there's other ways of just thinking about how you feel. So when you have a high blood peak, sometimes you might notice your heart rate going up. Many people after having a high blood sugar peak will also have a dip. And so you might feel slightly shaky, that kind of, post-meal slump that often people talk about. We also know that that dip, again, from the Twins Predict data, drives us to be more hungry, drives us to eat a lot more food, and drives us to eat about 300 calories more over a 24-hour period. And so it's thinking about how you're feeling, listening to your body, and taking that on board.
Okay, all right. So it's not about just eating less and weighing more, it's being much more sensible of what you eat, working out whether it's the carbs or the fats that are affecting you, and perhaps also improving everyone's quality of diet, isn't it? So, I mean, we haven't talked about fiber, but about 7 years ago, Christina Meni and Anna Valdez in our group did do a big study over, I think it was about 20 years of twins, showed the twins that continually ate most fiber over that 20 years had the least weight gain, regardless of what else they ate. And fiber is the one thing that we know feeds our gut microbes, and so will improve your gut health. So I think, again, it's moving away from this idea that it's just this total energy inputs. And quality of food is really key there, isn't it? And as well as fiber, there's other things that have come into food quality, aren't there? Just mention a few of those, Sarah. What else, apart from fiber, people should be looking at?
So one thing I'd say for people not to look at or not to focus on too much is just thinking about the calories and the nutrient composition. So when you're looking at back of pack labeling, I think it's really limited in what it actually tells you about the healthiness of a food. There are certain nutrients like polyphenols that we know are really good for you, but my recommendation is to take a whole dietary pattern approach. So think of your overall dietary pattern rather than focus on individual foods and individual nutrients, and look at foods rather than the nutrients. And so the kind of food you want to go for, it's quite simple. Don't try and opt for foods that aren't ultra processed. Try where possible to consume foods that are in their original structure. We know that the structure of food, which is often broken in ultra processed food, is so important to try and consume in that original structure. So if you fancy an apple smoothie, if you could have a whole apple instead, that actually has a really big difference on everything from your microbiome to your overall health. And then there's the tips, Tim, that you often tell people, which I think are great and actually encompass everything to do with a healthy diet around how to encourage, good gut health. I think you call them your 7 top tips. I don't remember them. You can whiz through those ones.
Well, yeah, but as a general rule, if you can get close to this, you're doing pretty well. So four things to remember. One is try and eat 30 types of plant a week. And that includes nuts and seeds and herbs and spices. So it's not as hard as it sounds. Second is to try and pick foods that are high in not just fiber, but also polyphenols. So these are these defense chemicals that give plants their bright colors, but also sort of tannic, astringent, slightly bitter tastes. And most berries are that nuts and seeds, but also brightly colored cabbages, lettuces, fruits, etc., and nice things like olive oil, coffee, dark chocolate, and even red wine. So polyphenols are good. Third one is have regular fermented foods, because they are basic live microbes you're feeding yourself, like seeding your gut microbiome. And then finally, reduce the number of ultra-processed foods, as Sarah was talking about, and really look at the label to see what an ultra-processed food is, because anything with a large ingredient list with lots of chemicals you've never heard of is unlikely to be good for you, and it's definitely not good for your gut microbes. So they're the 4 simple rules I think we're going to take away. So finally, we've got a question of saying, well, some of us did the PREDICT study in the very early days. We got our results. They were a bit crude. We didn't get quite the fine advice we'd like. What's the future looking like, do you think, if you looked ahead 5 years, Sarah, to what sort of advice we'll be giving people about their nutrition and their advice?
So I'd start by saying already since PREDICT 1 and the advice that the PREDICT 1 participants received, we have come on leaps and bounds. We've already made huge advancements. We completed the PREDICT 2 study, which was in another 1,000 individuals actually in the US. And we're now running the PREDICT 3 study, where we're up to about 40,000 individuals. So by generating all this new data allows us to really refine further and further our advice, and really kind of bridge that gap between that population-based one-size-fits-all advice right up to the individualized advice that we've been striving for. And I think for me, what I'm most excited about for the future from all of the work that you've done over the years with the twins data and the PREDICT data that we've done with the twins, and also where we're going from this, is the possibility that we will be able to deliver advice on all of those parameters that I talked about, that based on who the individual is, what they're eating, how they're eating, and also what is motivating them to do that. And I think that's going to be possible with all of these technologies we've got, that we might hopefully be able to, in the future, give real-time advice, so that Tim, for example, you could get an alert based on how much you slept, how much exercise you've done, how you're feeling that day, on what might be the best foods for you to have, given your own personal preferences as well, and given your current lifestyle. Okay, well, that's a great place to wrap up. And I think just want to reiterate that the reason we know all this stuff is basically because of all the twins listening, that we're pioneers in this, and we're the first probably people in this country to give their poo samples, test all this totally new nutrition research done at home on these wearables, etc., etc. Really pioneering work that is really setting the future. So you should all be really proud of yourselves. You've helped us so much, and I think we have a really exciting next decade in nutrition and gut microbiome as the whole area completely explodes. So thank you again for listening. Thank you for, as ever, participating and sharing your incredible data with us. And thank you very much, Sarah Berry, for being with us. And hopefully you'll be hearing from Sarah again in the future. Thank you. I hope to be here for the 40th anniversary. Indeed. 50th. Okay. Bye, everybody. Bye.